Welcome back to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here with two special guests. So today we're fortunate enough to be joined by Ron Reed and Greg Rosenbaum from South by Southwest EDU. Welcome to the show, Ron and Greg.
Super happy to be back with you, Michael.
It's nice to be on the line.
Yeah. So for our loyal listeners out there, it's basically there's two categories of listeners. There's loyal listeners and soon to be loyal listeners. So for those of you who were listening to Trending in Education last March, you know that we did a live taping of our show, our March Madness trend spotting show down in Austin for South by Southwest EDU. Ron and Greg were wonderful hosts while we're down there. We had a fantastic time at the conference. And then as if that were enough, it wasn't. We were also able to interview Greg and Ron to get a sense from each of you where you see the world of learning and education heading. Had a wonderful conversation, and we wanted to pick up on it kind of off cycle. So that was right in the thick of the conference. Now we're about 6 months out, and South by Southwest EDU will happen again in March of 2020, March 9th to the 12th of 2020. I would personally recommend it to anyone who has the wherewithal and the gumption to get down there. And there's some interesting pieces in play on the horizon for the next conference, which will be your 10th anniversary. So we wanted to spend a little time with Ron and Greg to talk about where we see the world of learning and education heading, where we think it might be by March of 2020, and then hopefully get a little bit of perspective on where we think things are heading more broadly. So like, where is the world of learning and education going? Are there trends that are emerging that are top of mind? So I think just to get started, I thought maybe we would start with you, Ron, just to try to get some perspective on South by Southwest EDU, because I think many folks may have heard of South by Southwest. They may have heard of South by Southwest EDU, and you're someone who understands both of those things, and you've been in the Austin community getting active around these activities really over the last, say, 15, 20 years or more. Can you give us a little perspective on the origin story of South by Southwest EDU?
Yeah, by all means. And again, really, really happy to be connected, Mike. And it's nice to be talking in October. As much as we loved visiting at the convention center in March, it's great to be yakking as we're really kind of building the plane we'll be hoping to fly here shortly. But yeah, the origin story is sort of a fun one. Long story short, my best friend is the guy that started South by Southwest Music. And he remains the CEO, managing director of the organization. And so while Roland was busy building South by Southwest Music into South by Southwest Film and Interactive and really this large convergence type of event, he and I chatted for 20 years about what the role of education could be in the context of the South by brand. Roland and I met in high school. We were on the school newspaper together. We cut a few classes to go see music. As we moved from high school into college, Roland was managing bands, and I enjoyed running with him to clubs, liberal arts major myself. Mm-hmm. But it really started probably a 25-year conversation about the role and significance of education and whether there was a fit. It felt real foundational to all of the sectors that South by Southwest was addressing, from music and film and tech. And their style of convening was really fascinating too. And mm-hmm. So that was kind of the inspiration of the EDU portion. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we're really proud at how the community has embraced the brand and our approach to hosting education conversations at South by Southwest.
Yeah. So, and then that began, was it 2009, 2010 was when EDU started?
Yeah, indeed. So Roland and I, best friends, best man at each other's wedding, godfather to kids and that sort of thing. We talked about it for a long while. Again, Roland was having great success growing and evolving South by Southwest. That was about the time there was a large recession and there was a nice reduction, unfortunately, in ed funding.
Mm-hmm.
And so the notion was maybe there's an opportunity to spin up a conversation about innovation and disruption in the sector.
Mm-hmm.
It started originally as a K-12 event and sort of a regional focus, but as per all of the South by, sort of worldview, we imagined it as something a little more grander as we proceeded with it.
Mm-hmm.
So the first year of South by EDU was indeed 10 years ago in 2011, again, largely a Texas K-12 event. And Greg joined the organization, really helped launch the event as well.
Mm-hmm.
I tease him, he's as much the soul and spirit of South by EDU as anybody around. And so together, I think we've had a blast trying to figure out how to grow and host a convening that is as impactful as the rest of South by.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'd love to maybe bring you in now, Greg, too, as someone who's been in since inception and has seen how the span of the last 10 years has unfolded for South by Southwest EDU. Any thoughts on that? Like how things have changed, how it's evolved, any war stories from the early years and thoughts on how, what's changed, maybe what hasn't changed over that span of time?
Sure. Yeah, it's been fascinating. And I think part of it too has just been the evolution of building an event and a convening for a community over the course of that period of time that started as sort of a Texas K-12 event back in 2011 in our partnership with the Texas Education Agency around a new sort of ed tech platform they were launching, and had grown into higher ed the next year, and then early learning and workforce development. And
Mm-hmm.
as the community went from 800 to 2,000 to 4,000 to 6,000, and now north of 8,000 or 9,000 registrants, we've really seen as the community has grown and matured, sort of a more mature reflection of what's going on in the space more broadly. And I think a mirroring of what we see trending in education over the last decade. And some of those things that I think stand out to us as we start thinking back on it now that we're approaching our 10th year is, I think one of the big things that's coming up in conversation around the 2011, 2012 time was the rise of Common Core, and standards and assessment were really big. And
Mm-hmm.
we're thinking about how do we measure education? How do we prove effectiveness? And I think, especially here in Texas, as they were going through a state adoption of the STAR test, but even more broadly, there was just a reflection of almost too much testing, and that it's not about the macro view, it's about the micro view, and moving into a personalized sense of learning and focusing in on the individual has really been sort of where the industry and the community has moved over the last 8 or 9 years. So I don't know that we really are looking at much programming going into the 2020 event that talks specifically about, there's actually nothing on Common Core, but it doesn't talk specifically about standards and assessment. It's talking about how do we prove effective practice and learning, how do we measure that. I think even higher education is being reflective about what role does the ACT and the SAT play in acceptance.
Yep.
And, are those tests effectively measuring an equity mindset when it comes to education, and how do we best reflect that? And so I think we're in this place where we're really focusing on the individual and finding a way for each person to succeed in their own learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Any additional thoughts, Ron?
Yeah, I mean, very much what Greg said. I think the evolution, I think when we first launched, and maybe particularly in partnership with an education agency here locally, there was this sort of attention and focus on the structures. And the conversation about education, to Greg's point, has moved from sort of that institutional framing to a lot more personal framing.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about education as like a tool of empowerment, as opposed to the domain of a higher ed or a K-12 constituency or community, it gets a lot more interesting and a lot more impactful in terms of education as a great unlocker and of opportunity for folks more broadly on it. So I think that's built a very passionate conversation about learning that is increased in tenor, I should say, over the decade. I think we enjoy a lot more discussions about learning, its impact on the learner, the future, et cetera, today than ever before. And we kind of love that aspect of it.
Yeah, and I remember us talking about this in March, and I think we shared a similar perspective on education versus learning, and what's institutional versus what's personal.
Yep.
And it's something. And by the way, bonus points to Greg for saying trending in education. You got titular there, so thank you, Greg, for that. But when we're trying to get a read on the zeitgeist, like the spirit of the times around what's emerging in learning and education, I think you have to add the word learning nowadays, and you have to think about it more. I always equate it a bit to the self-care, self-improvement movement, where the idea that learning and educational experiences don't end when you get your undergraduate or high school diploma. They actually need to last through the full span of your life course. And now that you've been doing this for 10 years, you're actually experiencing those changes. One of the questions that I had is, how much of your mission at South by Southwest EDU is to reflect what's happening in the world outside, the world of learning and education, and how much of it is to try to influence that. Because I did have a pretty profound experience, I will tell you, last year when I was there, and I couldn't tell how much of it was really reflecting the collective experience that everyone was having there, and how much of really organizing the conference is about curating that experience so that folks are getting a read on what's happening outside. But a little bit of that, I think, takes some forethought. So I'd love to get each of you, maybe starting with you, Greg, and then hearing from you, Ron, how much of South by Southwest EDU is designed to just reflect back to the community, this is who you are, this is what you're doing, and how much of it is requires some intentionality on the side of the organizers to say, this maybe needs more of focus, more attention, and we need to actually maybe influence where the world of learning and education is going. So maybe starting with you, Greg, and then Ron, if you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear from each of you on this.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it's probably helpful to share with your community here that, principally one of the ways that we are programming a lot of the event, this may account for upwards of like 70% of our program, is through a crowdsourced platform called Panel Picker, which every summer we'll launch for a month. People will go in and submit programming ideas, and then what's unique about it is we'll actually flip it to the community to provide their input. So there's a public voting element, there's an advisory board of over 200 education professionals that will go through on a more in-depth basis and review, and then the staff will review that as well. And so there's a reflection piece to the programming process that we do every year that's super important. I'll share this summer, I think we had over 1,700 proposals for EDU alone. South by Southwest will go through a similar process, but seeing that evolution every year gives us an opportunity to reflect what the community is going through, but also kind of curate a little bit on top of that to make sure that some key topics are being addressed. And so I'd say it's very much so intentional, the way that people experience the event and what they hope to get out of it. It's unique that we bring together such a diverse community within education, and I'm sure you felt that it wasn't just the middle school science teachers or a smaller subset that finds their own community in specific associations, but that I think in just creating an ecosystem and an environment that intentionally breaks down barriers between the different players within education, we are cultivating a unique experience that hopefully helps people find that impact and that reflection as a byproduct of being at the event. So the community reflection is a key piece to that, but building on top of that is something that we value each year. And I think it comes from having a team of 8 or 10 staffers that are out in the community, going to events, working with the community, learning from what's going on, and trying to sort of find those through lines between all those conversations, whether they're speaking to a nonprofit stakeholder or an institution or someone from a different area of learning, that they can sort of weave together what some of those trends are and help reflect that when it comes to the event each March.
Yeah, and just real quick, I think that's part of why there's been such a natural affinity between South by Southwest EDU and what we're trying to do at Trending in Education, where we're intentionally broad in our focus. Like one of my observations of late is that, the world is becoming very siloed, lots of insularity, where groups who have an affinity spend a lot of time finding each other and finding a safe place to validate their perspectives, which is great, particularly for underserved communities who haven't really had the opportunity to find safe places to connect. But what I really aspire to, and I definitely got this experience in 2019 when I was at EDU. I look forward to continuing to experience this with what the conference you're putting on, is that there were surprising connections. There were places where, one of the real benefits of diversity and inclusion is exposing people who otherwise wouldn't have been in the same room to each other, and finding surprising mashup connections, surprising places where, I hadn't really thought about that. And then Ron, as we maybe move to you for your perspective, I think frequently when you're going deep within an area of a community of interest, you don't always recognize that that same topic or theme is relevant somewhere else. And as someone who's been really in on the ground floor with what South by Southwest EDU has been over the years, I'd love to get your perspective on that. Like, are there some examples of surprising connections or places where, had you just been an ed tech conference or just focus on K-12, for example, you may not have seen some of the connectivity among some of the themes that we're talking about. So, and I'm throwing you a bit of a curveball because I know you can hit.
No. This is awesome, and I appreciate it. Now I'll invite Greg to help lean in on it as well. I'm thinking a little bit about where we started with that, the extent to which we reflect the community versus influence it, and I think that's a little bit of a story of our growth at South by EDU. I think our initial years, we were very much just trying to build a platform to give voice to these issues. And I think to maybe knit together a couple of observations, this sort of learner-centric view all of a sudden embraced the sense of equity and inclusion that crowdsourcing the program and panel picker has helped empower a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so I think a couple of things in terms of influencing the conversation. I think we see a vehicle to do that is really this diversity of community, recognizing that through lines are unique for everyone who attends. And so trying to find that empowerment piece is sort of central. So I think for us, our influence has been maybe twofold. One, in trying to bring the community together to give voice to their thoughts and reflections. Mm-hmm. And I think also just the notion of a brand that has personality and perspective. I think year one, year two of our own admission, we're learning and acquiring that. And I think 10 years in, we love the learnings that community empowers us to share on their behalf and more broadly with it. Mm-hmm. And so to your point, yes, I think a big shift has been the interdisciplinary nature of this, that again, a keen focus on very specific role profiles and how to move the needle with individual learners or initiatives or strategies or tactics, and all of those are important conversations. But in a broader sense, that inclusive conversation that affords everyone access to the benefits and engagements of the community, sort of where we lean. So, not to drone on too much, but I think a little bit about the unbundling conversation. Again, when we started, it was standards, it was inputs to higher ed. Mm-hmm. Now it's a lot more learner-driven conversation. And that's really throughout K through 12 and higher ed and beyond, in my mind, on it. And I think that has been something that we share a spirit and zeitgeist about as well as the community. So we love that.
And I'll jump in on this too. Mike. I mean, I think one thing that's interesting, if you zoom up even further, it's notable that South by Southwest, a brand that's known for music, film, interactive technology, is leaning in on education, that they've put education on this pedestal of a cultural platform on the same weight and measure as the rock stars of the world and the filmmakers and the actors and the designers of the future of technology, that South by Southwest as a brand is saying, no, education needs to be part of that mix and is key to that. Is super important. I think 10 years in now that we've built this community, we've connected it to the rest of South by, we're thinking about how do we keep sort of encouraging those connections, but also elevate the fact that South by Southwest is really leaning in on what education is all about.
Yeah, and I love that point too, because like, if you, first off, on a selfish level, I like talking about the world outside, which includes the world of media, entertainment, sports, technology, interactive. The idea that all of those things should be understood in terms of their impact on learning. That's one of the things that I've talked about on this show a lot. When we started in 2016, we were like, oh my God, how are we going to do a weekly show on trends that are relevant to learning and education? Now we're pumping out 2 shows a week, and we could likely we could do more shows if there were more time. I've also reflected on this where like, education, learning, maybe used to be a separate section in any conversation. Maybe you get to it, maybe you don't. Maybe it makes it to the front page once or twice a year. What I've noticed now that we've been doing this show for a long time is that it's bubbling up to the top of the consciousness on a more routine basis. So, South by Southwest proper is talking to musicians and filmmakers and folks in technology. If they're not thinking about learning, they're doing themselves a disservice. And I think the crossover appeal of South by Southwest as an interdisciplinary brand that is interested in learning and education, I'm really excited for the next 10 years, and I think that's really where we wanted to pivot to, and now Ron, you get bonus points for saying zeitgeist first. So well done. We're all winning. But as we're trying to get a little more zeitgeisty about it, looking ahead to 2020, and this is a toss-up question, so whoever wants to answer first, feel free to weigh in. But what themes are emerging? So you have the benefit of being able to be a little more longitudinal over the span of 10 years to look at more broadly what trends we're seeing. This is the y'all, and I'm allowed to say y'all, which is wonderful. Y'all are vetting Panel Picker and your user community and that growing community of educators and learners who are interested in engaging in the convergence zone that you're building down in Austin each spring. What's changing? If we were plotting this graph, where are the points of inflection? Where are things starting to accelerate and move faster? I've heard of trend spotting as, identifying the accelerating present. So like, where do we see things accelerating in the world of learning and education as reflected either through South by Southwest EDU or just through your own personal perspective on this? Love to get a little bit into that, maybe beginning with you, Ron, and then rounding that out a little more with Greg.
Yeah, and I may lean into Greg a little bit more in the sense that really we enjoy as a team mining Panel Picker and seeing what all is in there, and really trying to read the interests of the community. To Greg's other point as well, we're also out and about. We were at EduCause last week, and others are going to iNACOL. We've got a colleague who's speaking at an ed tech event in Tokyo, and so we are trying to be more attentive, but certainly given the gifts that the community shares with us from a programming, we have a fun process where the team sort of dives in and pitches one another on their preferred or their identified trends. Greg's led a good team initiative over the last several years, and so maybe it's both some context of what is enduring about it and also some new things. I might go ahead and sort of defer to you for initially, Greg, if I might. On it.
Sure.
It's really interesting. There are a few things. I think one of the things that we were sort of getting to earlier was the notion of the individual learner and how there's a focus there. I think one of the other manifestations around that has been just the rise of SEL, social emotional learning and wellness. That was a track we introduced to the program. We'll do about 16 tracks a year, and we introduced it 5 or 6 years ago. And now this summer it was one of the top 5 tracks coming out of Panel Picker alongside of K-12, higher ed, equity, and emerging tech and development. That the whole student development and social emotional learning is on par with a lot of those other sort of grand scale topics is really notable in my mind that people are thinking about it that way. One of the things that I found super interesting of late, especially, we launched this last summer in partnership with Amazon Web Services, a voice technology development challenge. And notice coming out of Panel Picker again that the future of information delivery is really changing, and whether that is the use of voice-enabled technology in the home or in school, or whether that is learning through podcasting and audio. I know that's an area that you personally are very passionate about, and that we've been super excited to see sort of grow and elevate. That a lot of us are consuming books and content in ways that are new and unique, and so we've seen sessions about what is the future of books and how does print media sort of live on. From a vendor standpoint, it's been interesting for us to see the transition over the years from having publishers be some of the main presences to technology companies being the main presences, and those publishers are sort of flipping into themselves sort of digital learning mechanisms and not just strictly publishing houses. And so it's sort of a fascinating wave of what the future of how we will be consuming information and learning in some fashions.
Yeah, I think maybe a couple of things. One, it's kind of pleasing to see technology more integral to the conversation than sort of held out. And one of the things we've been reflecting on is sort of the integration of tech. We see a number of curricular topics bubbling up this year. Maybe no surprise given the landscape. Civics, education is a hot topic right now. We might also appreciate the challenge of sex curriculum, curriculums regarding, forgive me, I'm losing
sex education.
Sex education, forgive me, that are being affected by that. I think, again, we see an enduring sort of rise of student voice and agency on the program. And maybe another trend worth calling out in alignment with sort of the policy arena is a lot of interest given the upcoming election on the program this year, which I think at South by EDU, we've always embraced policy as a really important conversation. We sort of know that the impact of policy decisions are grand and far-ranging, oftentimes beyond sort of their intent with it. And so really welcoming those conversations has been something that's been important to us. It feels like it's been very important to the community as well. We've, to Greg's point, enjoyed a number of conversations of federal policy and practice over the years, and I think that will continue. But I think one of the things that we're observing is really the light up in the conversation at community and city levels. We enjoy a goodly number of mayors talking about their work at South by EDU. This sort of localization of education, I think, again, sort of equates to this value prop of the learner in our community, in our town. What are our goals in that respect? Yeah. So I think we're excited about the program in process and that's to come for March.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to get a sense of the zeitgeist of where the world of learning and education is, Spirit of the Times, early March in Austin is a good way to get a read on that. So I'll speak from my personal experience, and then what should be my personal experience this coming spring too. So I know there's some announcements that are coming out around, if our listeners haven't had a sense yet, like your EDU is not frozen in time. You're continuing to push the envelope, explore new modes of delivery, to your point, Greg, new ways of getting educational content out there. One of those vehicles is the one that we're engaging in right now, podcasting. What's on the horizon there? So I know just more broadly, there's likely innovation that's beyond podcasting that will also be happening in 2020. but I know specifically for our listeners who enjoy this show may want to enjoy it live. There will be a component of that to what South by Southwest EDU will be launching in the spring. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and Mike's been, and Dan and others aligned to Training and Education Podcast have been great thought partners as we vision this out. But we're launching a podcast stage for live podcast recordings and tapings in the context of South by Southwest EDU that not only emphasize really interesting conversations around education, but the power of podcasting to be an influential sort of learning mechanism within education. And so I think we'll do a series of 15 to 18 different podcasts. We are actually tomorrow on Wednesday, October 23rd, announcing the first 300 or so sessions, including a handful of podcasts. We'll continue to start programming out that stage, but are super excited to bring sort of what is largely an audio format to life in a live event context at South by Southwest EDU. And I'll take the setup and maybe talk about a few other new things for South by Southwest EDU.
Please do. Yeah.
Well, I'm at it. So one of the other things that we're super excited about is the final day of EDU is the day before the rest of South by Southwest starts. So there's 4 days of EDU. We end on a Thursday, and then the next day is when interactive film and music kick off for South by. And we've often felt like there is a really interesting conversation going on at EDU about developing the next generation and reskilling the workforce and all of the learning that goes into building a talent pipeline. And then the event flips and there's a conversation about what the current landscape is, what the future of technology and work is, and how do we bring more connection between those two communities. And so we've trialed some things in the past, but are really building out a program that's a day-long series of sessions and workshops and film screenings and challenges on that Thursday that will not only be open to EDU registrants, but also early arrivals to South by Southwest as a way to start bridging those communities. We see value in those interactions. We know the serendipity of just being at the event is powerful. Mm-hmm. And so building out some content around workforce and talent pipeline, around cities of learning and policy, around leadership and sort of education, technology, and development, those things that are core to both communities, are hoping to kind of wed a little bit of what's going on at EDU with the rest of the world at South by Southwest.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of the point I think you were making, Ron, too, just that like the learner exists in a broader context, and the idea that EDU can reflect, your EDU conference can reflect that, where rather than separating out the learning experience from the rest of your life, one of the themes that I've been really gravitating towards lately is the idea that learning is a lifetime experience, and it exists within every context in which we live. So like if it's really a mindset shift to always be looking for opportunities to benefit and learn, and to both yours point, I think that ties directly to diversity and being exposed to difference in an interesting way. Are there other themes or other ideas that you want to make sure our listeners understand? If just not to bury the lead, if you want to experience the magic of training and education in live and in person, you will have an opportunity in the spring. And it is interesting too, because like I did, we recently went to the Sound Education Conference in Boston, which was fantastic. But that was more people talking about podcasts, which is different from experiencing the live emergent aspects of a performance. And that's where I think podcasting is interesting, particularly as it might relate to music. And then, Ron, maybe to try to, we're coming up on time, but bring this a little bit more full circle. Some of the roots of South by Southwest EDU are tied to music. The live performance of these podcasts is something I'm really excited about. But the idea that like when you're in the moment with people, we talked about how much we needed to script this conversation versus let it happen. It does seem like there's something magical that happens. And even as organizers, the fact that this is this cross-disciplinary convergence zone among, K-12, higher ed, workforce development, lifelong learning, educational technology. You have a mix of educators and makers and influencers. How does that all relate? Any parting thoughts? Again, just to put you on the spot a bit as we're getting closer to wrapping. But I've been struck by really the authentic spirit of the South by Southwest EDU brand. It's something that's definitely been very resonant for me. And I'd love to maybe, hear some sort of closing thoughts from you around how our listeners may be able to engage, and how, what emerges in live experiences and collisions with people you weren't anticipating to meet are very much central to what South by Southwest EDU is about.
First of all, I so love the framing and your view of our event, Michael. It's really flattering to hear it come back around as something that we've been working on for so long. And I think, as I reflect on some of the conversation we've had, I think what we love about producing South by Southwest EDU is that there is this sort of attention to the macro, and there's this real interest in the micro as well. Like on the one hand, we are inspired, empowered to build the big tent because we got an organization who we can't outgrow at scale, right? Mm-hmm. And yet, as the corollary or the converse to that is trying to provide intimacy and true value and connections for folks. Mm-hmm. And so, we'll have 400 or 500 sessions that we're able to work curating this year on a new format with podcasting is really sort of what jacks us about engaging. And it's also, I think, what helps us stay authentic. And I don't think South by would permit any other way. Like that's sort of the way the org rolls. As a community-fueled event, we'll go where the community takes us. We'll try to guide it where appropriate and possible. But fundamentally, it's a platform that we love sharing with the community in that respect. And so again, creating the intimacy and meaningful connections is something we spend a lot of time reflecting on. And we do that through programming and through a variety of other networking events. One of the very small things that we did that had a huge impact was coordinating a number of pop-up dinners at the event. Like we got thousands of folks that don't know one another, but they're interested in connecting. And so Greg and the team are saying, son of a gun, let's make some reservations somewhere. Let's invite folks to join in. It'll be a Dutch treat. We'll see how it rolls. And it was like a real powerful experience for folks. And so we think a lot about how do we open those doors for the community as much as we enjoy, again, spinning 1,000 plates. How can we drive these intentional connections along the way as well? Yeah. So I'm fond of saying we have more fun than the law usually allows hosting South by Southwest EDU. So we will look forward to seeing you in March and welcome your critiques and celebrations to help guide us as we move forward and trying to refine and improve and grow the event as well.
Excellent. Ron Reed, Greg Rosenbaum, the guys behind the magic that happens every March in Austin, in South by Southwest EDU. It's been wonderful working with y'all. I'll say it again. And we look forward to the spring. We look forward to staying in touch as we're gearing up for the launch of this podcast stage. It will be fun. I mean, there's a lot of value in the podcast stage alone, being there for those live performances, and that's just one of 16 or so tracks. I mean, there's plenty of concurrency, plenty of wonderful keynotes. As someone who's been to a lot of conferences, I will fully endorse this one as one that has a lot of bang for its buck. And yeah, I'd love to continue the conversation as we head into the spring. And thanks again to Greg and Ron for attending today on Trending in Education.